The story of Ethan is one that defies conventional understanding and tests the boundaries of belief. Ethan, a 10-year-old boy, was living an ordinary life filled with joy, curiosity, and an adventurous spirit. Little did he know that a seemingly typical afternoon would forever alter the course of his life and the lives of those around him. On a sunny day, with laughter echoing through the streets, Ethan's world collided with a harsh, unpredictable reality, one that would send him beyond the physical world into a realm he could neither comprehend nor fully describe. And from that strange, ethereal place, Ethan returned with a message, an urgent, terrifying warning that would shake the foundations of human understanding. The warning was not just a vague prediction. It was a vision, one so vivid and real that Ethan could no longer dismiss it as a dream or an imaginative escape. He had been sent back for a reason, and what he had seen was not just for him to know, but for the world to hear. The message was about humanity's future and the choices that would determine the course of civilization. It was a story of hope, fear, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness. But at the center of it all was a singular figure, a leader whose rise would spark a moment of reckoning for humanity. This leader, Ethan believed, was none other than Donald Trump, whose presidency would symbolize the great test humanity had been warned about. This is the extraordinary, haunting story of Ethan, the boy who died and returned to deliver a warning from beyond. A sunny afternoon turned tragic. It was just an ordinary afternoon in Ethan's small suburban neighborhood, the kind of day when the sun cast its golden glow over everything, making the world feel light, alive, and full of promise. Ethan, like most boys his age, was outside playing with his friends, riding bikes down the quiet streets, and savoring the simple pleasures of childhood. Their laughter filled the air as they raced one another, their voices cutting through the stillness of the afternoon like echoes of a happier time. But in the blink of an eye, that carefree moment would shatter. Ethan remembered darting across the street, not realizing that a car was coming around the corner. The vehicle's screeching tires and the deafening metallic thud were the last things he heard before everything went silent. He had been struck, his small body thrown several feet, the impact sending waves of pain through him. But he didn't feel it. All he knew was that the world went dark, and in that moment, he wasn't even aware of the frantic scene unfolding around him. Neighbors rushed to the scene, their faces filled with terror as Ethan's lifeless body lay motionless on the pavement. His mother's anguished cries echoed through the neighborhood as paramedics worked to revive him. To the onlookers, Ethan's heart had stopped, and his body was clinically dead for several minutes. Yet, against all odds, he was revived. But what no one knew, not even Ethan himself at that time, was that during those precious minutes, he had journeyed beyond the physical world into something far greater, a realm beyond the comprehension of any living being. The moment of transition, stepping beyond life. Ethan did not recall the moment of his death. His mind, perhaps as a protective mechanism, had blocked out the trauma of the accident and the pain that followed. What he did remember, however, was the sudden transition into a place unlike any he had ever known. It wasn't the familiar world of sidewalks, houses, and trees. It wasn't the home he knew and loved. No, this place was entirely different. It was not bound by time or space as he understood them. The first sensation he felt was one of weightlessness. It was as if he were floating, suspended in an endless expanse where the rules of the physical world didn't apply. The air was thick with a feeling of peace, so profound and all-encompassing that any anxiety or fear was immediately replaced by a sense of absolute calm. There was no pain, no struggle to breathe, and no discomfort. Ethan had been freed from his mortal body, and in its place was a serenity that he could hardly fathom. This wasn't just a feeling of comfort, it was a knowing, a deep, undeniable sense that he was safe, that nothing could harm him in this place. The next thing he noticed was the light, but this was no ordinary light. It wasn't harsh, nor was it like the sunlight we experience here on Earth. It wasn't even something that existed in a physical sense. Instead, the light was alive, surrounding him, embracing him, and filling every corner of this ethereal realm. It didn't blind him, but instead seemed to permeate everything, creating a soft glow that was somehow both invigorating and soothing at the same time. Ethan was surrounded by this light, and it felt like a loving presence, a warmth that wrapped around him as though it were conscious, as if the light itself had a soul. There was no mistaking the fact that this place was special. He didn't need anyone to tell him that this was a sacred space. He could feel it in his very being. The beings of light, silent communication. At first, Ethan didn't see anyone. It wasn't until a few moments had passed that he became aware of other presences in the space with him. He felt them before he saw them, an unspoken awareness that he was not alone. And then, slowly, figures began to take shape out of the light. These figures didn't resemble humans in the traditional sense, but they were beings, alive, radiant, and full of an energy that felt both familiar and otherworldly. They were not solid beings, as he might have expected. Instead, their forms were soft, glowing like the light itself, shifting and flowing with an energy that seemed to emanate from within. Though these beings didn't speak to Ethan in words, he understood them perfectly. Their communication wasn't through speech, but through emotions, thoughts, and a kind of deep understanding that transcended language. They radiated an overwhelming sense of peace, love, and compassion. When one of them stepped closer to him, it wasn't with words, but with a feeling, one of recognition, of warmth, and of unconditional love. It was as if Ethan had always known this being, even though he had never seen them before. This presence wasn't just familiar in a superficial way, it felt as though his very soul recognized them. Their love and care for him were palpable, so much so that Ethan could feel it wrap around him like a protective shield. He had no fear. He felt completely at ease, as if he had come home. The vision. A warning from beyond. The being, still radiating love, began to show Ethan something, a series of images that played out like a movie, each one flickering in and out of his vision. At first, these were personal moments, scenes from his own life, his family, and the people he loved. These memories were vivid, filled with emotion, and in that moment, Ethan understood the love that connected him to each of them in a way he had never fully grasped before. He felt their love for him, and his love for them was magnified, overwhelming, and pure. But then the images shifted. The warmth of the personal memories faded, and Ethan saw something far darker. He saw images of people he had never met, places he had never been, and events that made no sense to him. Some of these images were beautiful, but others were disturbing. He saw a creeping darkness, something spreading across the world, a shadow of fear and anger that seemed to engulf everything it touched. The world seemed to be on the brink of collapse, with people fighting each other, their faces twisted with rage and fear. In that moment, Ethan understood that this was not just a vision of the present, but a warning. The beings had not spoken to him with words, but the message was clear. Something was coming, something that would test humanity in ways it had never been tested before. A great change was on the horizon, one that would affect everyone. The being didn't explain everything to Ethan, but the urgency of the warning was undeniable. It wasn't just a shift in the world, it was a reckoning, a test for humanity. But what was this test? What was the nature of this impending change? The being didn't answer Ethan's questions. Instead, they looked at him with deep sorrow in their eyes, and in that moment, Ethan understood. He wasn't meant to know everything. He was meant to carry this message back with him. The fate of the world was in the balance, and humanity would be forced to confront its darkest fears and deepest truths. It was up to the people of the world to choose how they would respond. A journey into the unknown. My name is Ethan, and I was just 10 years old when I had the experience that would change my life forever. It began on an ordinary sunny afternoon, much like any other day in my childhood. The sun shone brightly, casting warm golden rays across the neighborhood as I raced my friends down the street, carefree and full of life. It was one of those days when the world seemed to hum with the energy of possibility. We laughed, shouted, and challenged each other to ride faster, not a single care in the world. But then, in the blink of an eye, everything changed. I had darted across the street, too caught up in the thrill of the race to notice the car coming around the corner. The driver slammed on the brakes in a desperate attempt to avoid hitting me, but it was too late. I heard the screech of tires, the sharp thud of metal meeting flesh and bone, and then silence. I don't remember the impact itself. In fact, I don't even remember the moment of my own death. The details of that moment, the moment when my life was ripped from me, have been erased from my mind. All I knew was that one moment I was laughing, riding my bike, and the next I was swallowed by an overwhelming darkness. The next thing I remember is floating, but it wasn't the type of floating you might imagine. It wasn't as though I was floating in water or air. It was more like being suspended in a realm outside the confines of time and space. There was no pain, no fear, just an incredible, peaceful calm. I remember feeling a sense of detachment from everything, like I had stepped outside of myself, like I was no longer tethered to my body. My body was left behind, motionless on the pavement, but I was somewhere else entirely. My parents later told me that I had no pulse for several minutes, and the paramedics had to perform CPR to bring me back to life. The doctors called it a miracle that I survived, that I came back without any apparent brain damage. But what they didn't understand, what no one could understand, was that during those moments when my heart had stopped beating, I had been somewhere. Beyond. It was something far beyond the physical realm, something that words couldn't fully capture. The realm beyond. In the moments after the darkness faded, I found myself in a place that defied any logical explanation. It was like nothing I had ever seen or imagined, and yet there was a strange familiarity to it, as though I had been there before, in some other time, or in some other life. I was no longer in the world I had known, a world bound by time, space, and gravity. There were no trees, no buildings, no streets or cars. Instead, I was surrounded by an expansive, almost otherworldly light that felt alive in a way I couldn't describe. The light wasn't harsh or blinding like the sun. It was soft and warm, wrapping around me like a loving embrace. It was as though the light wasn't just something I could see, but something I could feel, deep in my soul. It was like it permeated every fiber of my being, washing over me, filling me, calming me. And it wasn't just light, it was peace, an overwhelming, comforting peace that made all my worries, fears, and doubts dissolve into nothingness. I felt no pain, no discomfort, just a profound sense of safety and calm. I wasn't alone in this place. Although I couldn't see them at first, I could sense the presence of others. There were beings around me, but they weren't people like we understand them. Their forms were vague, not like flesh and bone, but more like translucent figures made of light. They radiated love and serenity, and though they did not speak, I understood them perfectly. They were watching me, but not in a way that made me feel watched or uncomfortable. Their presence was welcoming, as though they were happy I was there. As I adjusted to my surroundings, the beings began to take shape, their figures emerging from the light like shadows being cast on a canvas. They didn't have traditional human forms, but they were undeniably conscious beings, aware, alive, and wise. They glowed with a gentle, ethereal light, their outlines soft and flowing. Their movements were fluid, as though they existed in a state of constant change. They didn't speak to me in words, but somehow I understood them. The way they communicated wasn't through speech, but through feelings, images and emotions. They didn't need to say anything because I could feel what they were conveying deep in my soul. One of the beings moved closer to me, and even though I had never seen it before, I felt an overwhelming sense of recognition. It was as if, on some deep level, I had known this being for my entire life. I can't explain it, but it felt like family. Like this being was a part of me and I was a part of it. The being radiated love and peace, a presence so powerful and comforting that I couldn't help but feel completely at ease in its company. It wasn't intimidating or alienating. Instead, it was as if this being was there to guide me, to help me understand what I was experiencing. The being didn't need to explain anything to me directly. Instead, it showed me things. It wasn't a simple exchange of images, but rather a flood of experiences that filled my mind all at once. I saw glimpses of my life, moments of joy, love, and loss. Faces of the people I cared about flashed before me, my family, my friends. I felt their love for me in a way that was deeper than anything I had ever known. It wasn't just a mental image, it was an emotional experience that wrapped around me, filling me with warmth and a sense of belonging. I felt connected to everything, everyone, and everything that had ever been a part of me. But then, the images shifted. They began to change, becoming more unfamiliar, more ominous. The visions were not of my life anymore, but of others, people I didn't know, places I had never been. Some of these scenes were beautiful, much like the place I was in, but others were disturbing. I saw darkness creeping over the world, a shadow that seemed to grow and spread with every passing moment. I saw people fighting, their faces twisted in anger and fear. I felt their pain, their confusion, their desperation. It was like I could feel what they felt, their suffering and their rage. I didn't understand it all, but one thing became clear. The darkness wasn't just something happening to these people. It was something that was going to affect the world as a whole, something that would change everything. Then, the most unsettling image appeared. A figure, a leader. But this leader wasn't like anyone I had ever seen. This was someone with a presence so commanding, so powerful, that it seemed as though the world itself was bending to their will. I didn't know who this leader was at the time, but I felt their influence deeply. I could feel that this leader's rise was going to spark a great change in the world. This was not just a person, this was a force that would divide people, bring out the best and worst in humanity, and test the world in ways it had never been tested before. The being who had been guiding me didn't say anything about this leader, but I understood what was happening. It wasn't about the leader alone. It was about how humanity would respond to them. The being communicated this to me without words, a simple, powerful understanding that left me with a profound sense of urgency. The images faded, and I was filled with a sense of finality. It wasn't my time to stay in this place, not yet. Something was calling me back, pulling me toward the world I had left behind. Though I didn't want to go, how could I leave such peace? I understood that I had to return. The being, though silent, conveyed that the message had been given to me for a reason. It was a responsibility, and it was mine to carry. Return to Earth. A heavy burden, and just like that, the light grew brighter, overwhelming in its intensity. It was as though the entire realm was being consumed by this brilliant glow until I could see nothing else. Then, in the blink of an eye, I was back. I was back in my body, gasping for air as if I had been underwater for an eternity. My chest burned with the effort, my head spun, and I could hear my mother sobbing somewhere nearby. I felt disoriented, confused, but I knew one thing for certain. I had returned with a message, a warning that the world needed to hear. The world I returned to was heavy and chaotic. I could feel the weight of the pavement beneath me, the harshness of the sirens wailing in the distance, the frantic voices of the people around me. It was overwhelming. My body ached, and every breath felt like a struggle. But as I slowly regained my senses, I realized that I had been given a purpose. I had returned for a reason, and that reason was to share what I had learned, to share the message I had been given. But when I opened my eyes and tried to speak, I struggled to find the right words. How could I explain something as extraordinary as what I had experienced to my parents, to anyone? They were relieved that I had come back, but they didn't understand. How could they? How could anyone understand what I had seen, what I had felt? They would think I was imagining things, that it was just the result of trauma or a near-death experience. But I knew in my heart that what I had witnessed was real, more real than anything I had ever known. It wasn't just a vision or a hallucination. It was a deep truth. I had been shown something far beyond the scope of human understanding, something that needed to be shared, something that could change everything. I spent days in a fog, trying to make sense of what had happened. The doctors confirmed I was physically fine, my body was healing, and there was no lasting trauma. But inside, I was different. I could feel the weight of what I had learned pressing down on me, like a secret I wasn't allowed to keep, yet couldn't find the words to reveal. Eventually, I started to notice subtle shifts in the world around me. People seemed more disconnected, more angry. It was like I could sense their pain, even if they were hiding it. I began to recognize the darkness I had seen in my visions. It was in the way people treated each other, in the fear that gripped the world, political divisions, social unrest, hatred. It was like the seeds of that darkness had already been sown, and I was watching them grow. The images from the realm beyond were unfolding right before my eyes. I couldn't ignore the feeling that something or someone was coming. Something powerful, something that could either pull humanity together or tear it apart. I didn't know who or what it was, but I knew it was inevitable. I couldn't tell my parents. I couldn't tell anyone. How could I? How could I explain that the peaceful, loving beings I had encountered in the afterlife had shown me a glimpse of something darker, something that would soon affect the entire world? So I kept it to myself. I began to search for answers on my own. I read books. I researched anything that seemed connected to what I had experienced. I pored over religious texts, ancient prophecies, and philosophies. There were hints of it everywhere. Warnings of darkness, of division, of a leader rising to change the course of history. It wasn't just a random thought or a coincidence. I couldn't explain it, but I knew it was all connected. I began to pay more attention to the news, to the political shifts, to the leaders who were rising to power. The more I saw, the more I recognized the signs. It was all there, plain for anyone to see who looked closely enough. The seeds of division, the manipulation of fear, the power struggles. Everything that had been shown to me was coming to life. I didn't know how to stop it, but I knew I had to warn people. I started small. I talked to a few friends at school, trying to plant seeds of thought, trying to open their eyes to the things that were happening around us. They didn't understand, of course. To them, I was just another kid, talking nonsense about some vision I had. But I couldn't stop. The urgency was inside me, pushing me forward. I knew I had to keep trying, even if no one else believed me, even if it seemed like the world was too far gone. A new mission. And so, I made it my mission. I dedicated myself to finding a way to share the message I had been given. It wasn't just about speaking the truth. It was about inspiring others to see it for themselves. I spent years learning, growing, refining my understanding of the world, of the forces at play, and of how to make a difference. I knew it would take more than just words. It would take action. It would take unity. It would take love. The darkness I had seen in my visions still loomed, but now I had a purpose. I wasn't afraid of it, because I knew it wasn't inevitable. People could change. They could come together. They could rise above the fear and hatred that seemed to dominate the world. But they had to choose it. I had to show them the way. I may be just one person, but the beings in the afterlife had shown me something powerful. That we are all connected. that love and peace are stronger than any darkness. It's not too late. I know it's not. There's still time, and I will spend every moment of my life spreading this message. The world isn't lost yet. There's hope. There's always hope. And I will keep fighting because I know that together we can choose a better future. The light is still there, waiting for us all to embrace it.